Join us as we delve into the unique history of Frank James, Jesse James's notorious brother. Born in 1843 in the rugged Clay County, Missouri, Frank and his brother Jesse were inseparable. This bond deepened as they grew up, leading them towards a life of crime. The turning point was their service in the Confederate forces during the Civil War, which ignited their rebellious spirit. Their audacious bank robberies became legendary, painting them as rebellious figures against corporate power. Yet Frank James was then just an infamous outlaw. Frank James thrived as an outlaw, creating havoc with his brother Jesse. The James brothers stood out as notorious criminals, both feared and respected for their audacious bank robberies. These acts were seen as rebellious defiance against giant corporations, but the brothers were ruthless killers, not romanticized heroes. Their violent crimes often led to innocent casualties. Their legacy was one of fear, awe, and bloodshed. However, even their reign of terror had to eventually end. In 1882, the outlaw era came to a sudden halt for the James brothers when Jesse James was shot and killed. With his brother's death, Frank James found himself at a crossroads. Worn and weary from their notorious life of crime, he made a surprising decision, turning himself in. Despite the public's expectation of a swift conviction for his many crimes, Frank James eluded the hands of justice. His later years were a stark contrast to his days as an outlaw. Frank James, once a name synonymous with audacious bank robberies and brutal acts of violence, settled into a life of peace and quiet. He swapped his horse and pistol for a plow and a peaceful farm, leaving behind the thrill of the outlaw life. It was a transformation as dramatic as it was unexpected. Frank James lived until 1915, a stark contrast to his brother's violent end. From notorious outlaw to peaceful retiree, Frank James's life was nothing short of a wild ride. Having left behind his life of crime, Frank James's later years were a far cry from the lawless days he spent with his brother Jesse. After turning himself in and miraculously avoiding conviction, Frank chose a quieter, more peaceful path. His days of audacious bank robberies and brutal acts were traded for a life that was as normal as it could be for a man with such a notorious past. The legacy of Frank James is a complex tapestry, woven with threads of rebellion, crime, and eventual redemption. He was a man who was once seen as a symbol of defiance against large corporations, yet he was also a ruthless criminal who was not above taking innocent lives. This contrast between his earlier years and his later life paints a picture of a man torn between two worlds, a man who ultimately chose peace over chaos. In his later years, Frank James was not the same man who rode alongside his brother Jesse. He was no longer an outlaw, but a man who had chosen a different path, a path that led him away from the life of crime he once knew. And so we end our journey through the weird history of Frank James, brother to Jesse James. But we leave you with a question to ponder. Who do you think was more deadly, Frank or Jesse James? Share your thoughts in the comments below.